going on, you guys? In this video, I'm going to be showing you my approach to making Aphex Twin style IDM electronic music. Of course, a huge disclaimer, this example in no way tries to be exactly as good as Aphex Twin's music or perfectly replicate it. The best place to begin is with the drums, namely the kick and the snare. I'm using basically the 707 drum machine sounds here. The secret to this is I actually started the track in the beginning with just a snare drum. So I started sequencing the snare drum, and I only actually started with the snare on the 2 and the 4 beats of each measure. So I started with that, and then once I had the snare on the 2 and the 4 beats, I basically entered in the kick drum around it. So then I started adding kick drum samples, and because we're in Ableton and we're using Simpler to trigger the samples, I can rely on Midi sequencing in the track, and I can make very short Midi notes. I can make very glitchy sounding Midi notes. I can change the pitch dramatically if I want to create more variation. So I did that first with the kick drum. Then I went back to the snare and added more variations to it. Then I take that third musical element, which is a clap sound, and again, it comes from a 707 style drum kit. And what I did there was I added in the clap as sort of this third element. And you can see it's much sparser in the Midi sequencing. I have some dramatic pitch shifting moments with the clap. That creates more variation, but in general, it's just a sparser element in the sequencing. And generally speaking, the kick for me is always the element that's the most busy. The snare is the second busiest, and the clap is obviously the most sparse part of the rhythm section. And then I just went to my synthesizers. A very popular Aphex Twin synthesizer sound is sort of this mono synth sound. You have one oscillator, it's sort of detuned a little bit, and the second oscillator is basically playing a perfect fifth interval. I do this by taking the second oscillator and pitching it up 7 semitones, which gives me a perfect fifth in the major scale. And then I just pick a different kind of waveform than the default one on the first oscillator. So I just made sure I added some unison to it as well to give it a wider, more out of tune, warbly kind of analog sound. Then of course I brought in a little bit of delay to give it sort of this well, it just gives it more of an ambient sound. It makes it sound bigger. And that's how I got the sound of this synthesizer. Our second synthesizer is using Reactor. I have this synthesizer named Rounds. Honestly, it's just really like a Fender Rhodes is really all it kind of sounds like in a basic electric piano sound. Both of these synthesizers are basically using the minor pentatonic scale, and they're kind of sequenced in a way where they're doing a sort of call and response pattern. Call and response refers to when one element makes a musical phrase, another musical element makes a responding phrase to it. Here I'm using Operator, and this is giving me the ambient sort of poly synth sound. It's a very simple patch in Ableton's Operator instrument. I literally just have 2 oscillators. One is slightly higher than the other. Then basically they go through an LFO and a filter. It makes them warbly. I add on a chorus to make it even more warbly and wider. Added some warmth to make it sound more analog. And then I just ran it through a lot of reverb. You can hear the patch on its own. It's just like a very wavy FM synthesizer sort of sound. And when I add in all the reverbs, you get something that's very ambient. This is really meant to mimic a lot of the sound design that was used in early Aphex Twin records like Selected Ambient Works, Volume 1 and 2, which used a lot of FM type sounds. If I go down here, the third part of the track is really the sampling. So making creative usage of samples is a big part of adding that extra layer of variety to the track. And some of these samples actually come from 707 drum machines. Like I've got a heavy bent tube sample here. This is actually the sound of hitting a 707 through a tube distortion. And I just sort of like chop up these samples, use them in interesting ways, kind of subverting expectations in the track. Because as you can see up here, once we go to the repeat of the phrase, I actually take out the drums. So now you're going to hear the sample take its place. So the samples are there to create variety and sort of subvert your expectations in creative ways. You can pitch shift these things really heavily. You can chop them up really heavily. Automation I think of as its own individual instrument in the mix. Some people use automation more creatively in genres like EDM, and I feel like with Ableton Live you have a distinct advantage because using automation in Ableton is so easy. So if I hit caps lock A, I'm going to bring up my automation screen, and you can see various aspects of my track are using automation in creative ways. If I go to my clap track, you can see that I have automation on both the volume and the mute button for the reverb of the clap. So for instance, the reverb will get very loud here where the clap hits. I'm playing with a certain element of a sound to create an extra layer of variety. And I'm not doing it randomly. I'm really trying to like figure out what moments it sounds right for the reverb to be on and what moments it sounds right for the reverb to be off. You could kind of do this in real time as the track is looping. I do this with other elements as well. Like I have this riser sound and I turn the drive all the way up as you get to the crescendo of the riser. And one of the coolest things I do with automation in this track is I actually automate the tempo itself, which just like any other element in the mix in Ableton, it's really easy to automate your tempos. For instance, when we get to that crescendo in the track, the automation of the tempo rises. So I'm going to rise the tempo there as the dynamic energy is rising. And then it returns back to 147 BPM. I do this really dramatically at the end of the track where I cut things basically down to 70 BPM, like half time, and then speed everything back up again really fast at the very end. And I do this for a reason, not just to be weird or to be glitchy, but if you were counting in 147 BPM, by the time you got through this automation and got back to the start of the loop, you'd actually would be landing sort of approximately on beat 1 of measure 1 at 147. So I can actually count that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So I sort of land on 1 if I was just ignoring that tempo change altogether, using tempo automation to create a musical effect in your track. In reality, it took me about, I would say maybe 90 minutes to get this demo track together, and I was actually spending a little extra time just messing around with things and enjoying myself. In reality, you could probably do something like this in about an hour, and this is a solid 25 seconds of music. So I could just take this stuff, duplicate it, and start adding in new ideas in the next section. Hopefully this video was useful to you. If you're into music production topics, I have a Gumroad store. Link is in the description of a ton of free stuff you can check out. And yeah, if you found this video useful, hit the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you later.